Hello, everybody, and welcome to a little bit of a review as to how Ofsted's new or not so new inspection framework is going. So, welcome. And you may be watching this because you saw the original chat that five former HMI had about the new framework, which we published on the 9th of November. And I'm delighted to say that that's had over 700 views. So, clearly, some people found it quite interesting or at least relevant. So we're just going to revisit, see where we are. So let's do the introductions first. Let's go to the colleague who's still working in a school. Well, I know Adrian's still working in a school, but actually it's got a substantive role as a leader. So I just want to welcome John Hayes. Hello, John.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
So formally my name is John Hayes, and currently I'm the head teacher at Gospel Oak School in Camden, and I also act part of the week as executive head at the Netley campus, which is also in Camden near Euston Station.
I think those of us who've been HMI will know that area very well as we travel into Euston Station and walk down to the office. Anyway, Adrian, do you want to go next?
So I'm Adrian Lyons. I was an HMI for over 16 years. Um, I still visit schools fairly frequently, and I'm in a school today down in Cornwall where we've just experienced 4 seasons. We've had spring, winter. I think we may be on summer just for the next few minutes.
Lucky you. And Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Price-Grimshaw. I was HMI between 2001 and 2008. I carried on inspecting after that, and I also worked for the DFE, or the TDA as it was then, in initial teacher training. And I've been carrying on since then, working with schools in an advisory capacity, and also working a lot in governance at the moment.
Yeah. And I'm Frank Norris, again, a former HMI, who more recently has been involved in the Alternative Big Listen, the Alternative Big Consultation, and the Ofsted's independent post-inspection survey, which we're conducting at the moment. So yeah, we know inspection very well, but and I think that's what drew us together because we had concerns about what was being proposed. When we spoke in November, one of the things that we were looking forward to was a stronger emphasis on inclusion. But I think we're also concerned about how the evidence was going to be gathered. We had some concerns about case sampling, the depth of the evidence that was being used to substantiate judgments, the toolkit and its vague use of wording. For example, I think it was you, Julie, that said, what does significant minority actually mean? Generally, what do we mean by generally? The references to national averages and how that could affect schools in some of the more challenging areas. And also, we then sort of spoke about two big things for me was how the hell are they judging progress? Particularly, well, in all schools, but particularly in primaries. But then also around the number of grades that were being used, which were in effect meant to be replacing the overall judgment, but we seem to have multiplied that by a number of times. And just for an update, it looks as though there's going to be even more subgrades within a grade. So, there's quite a lot to get into. I think we were alerting colleagues to some concerns, and it was then that John reached out to me because he completed one of our survey forms for the post-inspection survey. And I then spoke to John a couple of weeks ago and invited him on to here. So I know that this is one inspection, and we've got to make that clear. And there are obviously, some very skilled inspectors out there conducting very effective inspections. But, this all sprung about because of the Ruth Perry incident, the tragic events there. And so I think that what John shared with me is definitely worth sharing more widely. So if it's all right with colleagues, would it be okay just John give you 10 minutes and I'll hold you to that so that we do have a chance for discussion. So just tell us a little bit about what it was like for you.
No, thank you. So I would start by saying, well, just to give my perspective on it, I'm coming to the end of my formal headship career. I'm retiring this term, early retirement, I must add. But I've been in this job for a very long time. I've been at this school for 14 years. I've been an executive head for a number of years. Prior to that, I was head of school improvement for the London Borough of Islington for 8 years. Prior to that, head teacher in Hertfordshire, and my teaching career in Hertfordshire. I've been through either as a leader or a teacher many inspections. The one that we were put through in January this year was, and I've described it, and it's no exaggeration, the worst experience of my professional career. On the Wednesday, in the morning meeting, the way that the inspection was going and the way it was being conducted, I burst into tears during the feedback to that part of the meeting. I'm sort of cutting a lot of this detail down, so feel free to ask me any questions
I
about
think it's
it.
worth saying, John, the grades that you were getting, I think by saying that you think, oh, all the grades were rubbish. You know, they were in the lower end.
We came out as strong for everything, apart from behaviour and attendance, where we were only given expected, despite behaviour in the school being probably the thing that we are the best at. So that's general conduct around the school. Children's learning behaviour is exceptionally good and has been for many years. And in fact, during the inspection itself, the lead HMI asked me when we were doing our walk around how we'd managed to get behaviour to be as good as it is. We had quite a long conversation about it. But because it's tied into attendance, we could only get the same grade that the lowest grade is given within that judgment. And because we missed a very small part of a sentence about attendance, and despite the fact that until that point we were solidly strong, because we didn't get every single bit, I would say we got 95% of the statements. But of course, if you don't get 100%, you aren't any of them at all. You can only be the box down where you do get 100%. And so that was the direction of travel. We'd had that conversation on the Tuesday evening. I had asked the lead to contact Ofsted and check that this was appropriate, that this was correct, this was the way to do it. And in fairness, she said she had done that, and that when we got the feedback the following morning, the answer was no to me and my request, and that it looked like we were going to be only expected or potentially requires attention. And then she said, because you requires attention for that, you might be requires attention for leadership and governance as well. None of which for me was in any way accurate or fair, and in fact made absolutely no sense given everything else they were saying about my school. And I think this is the bit that, you know, in terms of safeguarding well-being, I think this was the bit that upset me the most and caused me to literally, I don't think I've ever burst into tears in school before, but I did. Because this is, as head teachers, and you have all been in those leadership roles in schools, you give every bit of yourself for your entire career to this job. And then when you get somebody who's been in your school 10 minutes telling you that essentially you're not good enough, that hurts. At one point, and the nod to, you know, the well-being and safety of head teachers and leaders following the tragedy around Ruth Perry, was to repeatedly ask me if I was okay. And when I at one point said, no, I'm terrified, we moved on to the next question. I mean, I kind of wanted, well, what do we do now? I've told you I'm terrified. Now what? Well, now nothing. So at that point in the meeting on the Wednesday morning, my deputy, who's also our DSL, had come into the room, having been slightly late because he was on gate duty, and saw me in tears, saw my Senko get up and walk out of the room in tears. He left the room and I wondered what was going on. He went and phoned the Ofsted line to speak to senior HMI about our well-being. He got a phone call back. He had a very long conversation with the senior HMI. He described in great detail what was going on and the process that we were going through. He was asked if the inspection should be stopped. And I was in the room at the time, and I said, I wrote on a piece of paper, do not stop. We have to keep going. I can't do this again. So we carried on.
So
By
really,
the end of the day, sorry, go on.
So in effect, there is no. I'm just thinking if there's no response when the inspector says to you, are you feeling okay? You say no, I'm not feeling okay. The only option then is for them to ask you again, are you feeling okay?
Yeah.
Or to suspend the inspection, which actually I would have thought just adds to the stress and strain of the whole experience.
Yeah.
Because how long are you going to suspend it for? Is it going to be suspended for a day, 2 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? I don't know. At that stage.
And my concern then was how do I say that to my staff?
Mm.
We're almost finished, but we're going to stop and we're going to do it all again in a few weeks. Well, what's that? I mean, that's not the solution to a situation I should never have been in.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to the whole process. During the day, there was a meeting with my governors. Not long after that meeting, it was an online meeting. 3 of my governors turned up in my school at the entrance and said, we've had our meeting with the HMI. We've listened to you. We've listened to some of the teachers speak to us about how this is going. And they said, we're going to come and sit here for the rest of the day. We're not going to work. We're going to do whatever you want us to do to support you all to get through this. Just by sitting in our foyer, they decided around lunchtime that they were going to phone HMI as well and explain that they thought the thing was going really, really bad, that it was cruel, was what they were saying. We got through it. We got strong judgments, apart from the one that's utterly ridiculous. The feedback meeting, which should have been a huge celebration for my SLT and my governors, was a horrible meeting. Various people came up to me and said, I feel dead inside. There was no celebration afterwards. Everybody just wanted to leave the building and go because it was awful. So the whole idea that they've come to celebrate your success from our point of view, and obviously this is just one school,
yes,
was not at all anything close to that. It was horrific. But immediately after that, I had, given that my deputy had reported concerns about my well-being, my governors had done likewise, the fact that I never heard again from Ofsted shocked me. Then, as you will all know only too well, you get the draft report. You can either comment on the draft or you can make a complaint.
I wasn't aware of this. Were you aware of this, colleagues? Just explain that again, John. Sorry to cut you off.
So you get an option to say that you didn't like the way it was done, or do you want to make any factual accuracy checks and corrections? So I felt certain that there was going to, ever optimistic, I thought somebody's going to pick up the fact that we phoned the helpline twice in the same inspection. That's not going to get ignored. So and there were so many issues with the draft that I felt compelled to respond to those. I don't want to cast aspersions on the quality of the HMI, because I think, and listening to your previous recording, I think this framework is undoable. I don't think that inspectors can actually achieve what it's expecting. Somebody used the phrase supermarket sweep.
Yes, yes.
running around the school, grabbing at stuff at speed, desperately trying to find evidence to support judgments, is what it felt like. It felt slightly out of control in that sense. So no personal criticism of anybody on that team, but it wasn't a particularly coherent writing. Some of the sentences didn't make a huge amount of sense. So I did do what I could to try and address some of that. It was only then when I then got the final report that I was then there is the official survey of how you feel it went. And I wrote at length about how I felt it went, how unfair I thought it was, how unfair I thought it was that behaviour and attendance are somehow the same judgment, which is ludicrous, and that I felt that the care for me and my senior leaders, it just isn't there. And in fact, it's worse than I've ever known it to be. And I thought even that would prompt some kind of a response, excuse me. Nothing.
Wow.
Nothing at all.
So you've not been revisited by a senior HMI or anything like that?
Well, what we did have was, because it just happened that the Camden Head Teachers Conference happened that started the day that we finished our inspection.
Right.
I was able to travel to the conference and meet with my colleagues, and that was very helpful because people were very supportive. And in fact, the DCS from Camden was present, heard me speak about my experience, and another head teacher who was also there, who had a not dissimilar experience just before we did. And he enabled us to have a meeting with a couple of senior HMIs from the London region, who we met just before the Easter break. And we had a face-to-face conversation with them. But that was prompted by Camden Council, essentially, asking for that. That wasn't any entitlement that I had as a head to receive any kind of feedback, conversation, well-being visit, if you like, from Ofsted at all.
Right.
So had that not happened, had I not gone to that conference, had he not heard me speak at length about our experience, I don't think I would have had that opportunity either. So I would still be without any sense that Ofsted has understood the impact that they as an organisation have on school leaders, and their response, I think, to the tragedy around Ruth Perry is utterly woeful. It's disgraceful, in my opinion, because I think this framework is worse than I've ever encountered in decades of going through these things.
Wow. So, thank you, John. I mean, colleagues, that was the reason. Having heard that, and that's the second time I've heard John go through the story. There's no way that an inspection process should result in that sort of response, is there? So, and I think it's worth just re-emphasizing the point. I think got it right, John. You can't complain about the conduct of the inspection and complain about the quality of the report. You can only go down one route. So clearly John had complaints on both fronts, but the system won't allow you either go one or the other. Which is quite a clever way, isn't it, of reducing the number of contacts with Ofsted. And of course, if you emphasize on the report, which is probably your most pressing issue, because it's going to get published soon, you want to make that as much as you can, and perhaps deal with the conduct issues afterwards. This doesn't seem a fair way of progressing it, progressing your concerns. Can I also just raise one other issue, because I'm meeting a number of Johns in this way, sadly. Another colleague has raised a concern about, if you do make a complaint about an inspector, that actually that complaint, as far as we're aware, actually is undertaken without conversation with that inspector. So, and the reason for that is that you and I, all of us who have been HMI will know how heavily programmed you are. There is no program time set aside for that work. So in effect, that what happens is the system tries to deal with it in a broad way, in a general terms. But actually, I have got sight of some responses where it's absolutely clear that the lead inspector who has been accused of something has not actually been referred to in the response to the complaint, because there has been no conversation with that lead inspector. So going back to John, if you were to complain, obviously you'd want to speak to, if you were doing the investigation, colleagues, which we've all done, you'd want to speak to the lead inspector and perhaps one or two other inspectors to get a view as to, what was it like? Is this a head teacher who's actually, just really got the wrong end of the stick, or is this actually something which is, there's a strong element of truth about it, and how would we respond? I think, Adrian, have you got a response to all of that?
It kind of, somebody who, like myself, who spent so much of their career on the inside of Ofsted, it was never perfect, but it makes me somewhat embarrassed to have, I used to be so proud of having that that title of Her Majesty's Inspector and carrying it, and it's difficult to be proud to have worked for the organisation these days. The issue I just want to focus in on perhaps is the one about pausing the inspection, being, that really being the main thing that I think that the main confidence building measure that the current chief inspector thought would buy people off in the wake of the Ruth Perry incident, that inspectors, as you say, are required to ask and record in the evidence base. Yes, we asked if they're doing okay. But I know several head teachers who said, yeah, we got asked, but actually I was being totally crushed, but there was no way I was going to tell them that because they paused the inspection. So it's kind of, as I think you alluded to, Frank, it's kind of there, but no, it'd be interesting to know how many times that's actually been used, because I suspect it's infinitesimally small, because nobody's going to want to trigger another inspection.
Yeah. Julie?
John, when you were saying this about asking if you're all right all the time, this is what I was getting back. I've got back from so many people, and it made me think about, bear with me on this. Once when I was on inspection, I stayed in a hotel, and it was pretty terrible. When I was checking out, the guy on the checkout said to me, "Was everything all right with your stay?" And I said, "Well, no, not really." And he just said, "Oh, right. Are you paying card or cash?" And when I said something to the hotel, they said, "He's not had the training about what to do if people say no." And actually, that's where we're at with Ofsted now. They've had all this training, and they honestly think that looking after head teacher well-being is saying, as another head said to me, asking them every time you see these people, "Are you okay? Would you like to go and have a cup of tea? Would you like to go and have a sit down?" And one of them said it was taking all his strength not to turn around and just swear a lot and say, "No, I don't want another so-and-so cup of tea. What I want is for you to listen, and I want you to look at the evidence I'm giving you." So I think this notion of, and we all remember the time, we're having a training on mental health and head teacher well-being and all that. And I'm sorry, but it's just been an absolute shambles as far as I'm concerned. The number of heads that have said this, it is not asking people every 5 minutes if they're okay, if you don't know what the response is, if they say no. And if it's pausing an inspection, yeah, as Adrian says, totally get this. Nobody wants that, because they're not going to go away and leave you alone. They're going to come back. They're going to put you and your staff through it again. And this is not good enough.
Yeah. Can I just come back on some of those things? I think you're absolutely right. It is that's a really good analogy. In the online meeting on the Monday, I think I was asked one question about anything where I could explain that we're heading towards a deficit budget, we've got massive falling roles and send levels that are through the roof. And so I am already a very stressed leader. And now you're coming to do this to me. So, and take it from me, we are public servants. We have millions of pounds worth of public money at our fingertips to spend. Accountability is right. It is absolutely entirely appropriate that we are properly scrutinised and checked that we do the right job for our kids. I totally get that. But the context that we work in didn't seem to matter because it's not in the framework, so we don't really care. So we're not interested that you're already a very stressed human being struggling to keep your school going. We're going to test you on all of these things. And therefore, when you then say, actually, now you've pushed me over the edge. Well, you didn't. Nobody checked whether I was already on the edge, and I think that is something we need to really consider. Is the state of mind and the well-being of head teachers now, before they get the phone call to say Ofsted's coming tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I do think that is another consideration. With the complaint or correction bit, when we had the conversation with the senior HMI from London, they did appear to know that was a thing, and they also did recognise that seemed wrong, that was a weird.
Right.
But I don't think that's new. I think that's been in place that way. I seem to recall that from previous frameworks, that aspect where you do the check. It's check or criticise, not both.
There's a funny symbol in the bottom right corner. That's Adrian Gray. Can you hear me, Adrian?
No, sorry, Frank. I'm a bit late. I was a bit late back for my hospital appointment.
Don't worry, that's fine. We're actually coming to. I think we're coming to a close soon. But I think one of the things that this was meant to be about, and I think about the overall effectiveness judgment being lost. But actually, I'd be interested to know how colleagues feel about the idea, as the Chief Inspector made clear. I was troubled by putting attendance and behaviour together, which I think, bearing in mind, he is responsible for the framework and he has the power to not do that, but he did it. He's troubled by it, and now we have this situation where we have subgrades. So in effect, we have subheadings, but still an overall attendance and behaviour grade. So I'm just interested in what colleagues feel about that move. So let's go to John first.
I've listened to HMCI talk about this on various video things, and I would love to be able to apply that logic to my own leadership and say to parents, yeah, I'm sorry that doesn't make any sense, but they made me do it.
Yes.
What job can you be the leader of an organisation that does a thing that's wrong and not be prepared to step up and go, I have accountability for all of this, like I do in an inspection? How does that not apply to him as much as it would do to me? That's wrong. And I know you talk, there may be subgradings now. For me, the thing that all we've done is taken a one-word judgment and turned it into a load of coloured dots. And it's not a report card. It's just an online report that has some drop downs. So I don't whether somebody doesn't quite. That's silly. That's just like having any PDF document. Instead of scrolling up and down, you now click on a heading and the text drops. Big deal. What have you achieved there? But having that now spent time trawling through lots of other schools' inspections just to see how it worked for other people, the number of times I've stopped after looking at the coloured dots and not read any of the words, and I'm kicking myself. Why am I doing this? Well, if I'm doing it, parents are doing it. How is that? If this is all for parents to understand the quality of a school and how it would fit their child and how good what kind of a job it's doing for their child, this obsession with these ridiculous coloured dots is insane, because nobody's reading the words. I think that we need a system where people read the words, and that's how they understand the school, not judging the shading on a dot on the top of a pretend app.
Julie?
That's always been the challenge.
Go on, Adrian.
Sorry, Julie. Yeah.
Julie.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say this really chimed with me because one school I've worked with in the past, their behaviour is very good. They'd actually only bid for expected. It's a secondary school. The behaviour is very good. They didn't get expected. It dropped down because of attendance. And their attendance actually isn't bad. But the reason it dropped down was because that particular inspector said, I really would have liked to see a better use of the codes to identify patterns. And they're saying, well, you know, this is what we're up against. And this thing about the context is the lens through which we see the inspection. Rubbish. I'm sorry. I've got a lot of evidence that that's not happening. But the reason the head was really annoyed about this is because, as you say, John, it's a drop-down menu. They look at that and they say behaviour and attendance needs attention. And actually, parents were looking at it saying, oh, I did think behaviour in that school was bad. Well, it wasn't. But now they look at that colour,
Exactly.
needs attention. And they're all worried about sending their child to that school because behaviour apparently isn't good enough. And that is just not acceptable as far as I'm concerned.
It's the length of time that those dots, which is terrible, isn't it? We've come to the dots, but the length of time those dots remain on that scorecard. You know, they're not going to do. I think most parents would believe those dots would change over time. You know, like there'll be a refresh next year or something. You know, but no, folks, they're there until you get inspected again. You know, so if it's about actually wanting parents to know, is this a good choice for my school or for my child? Actually, the stuff we're giving them could well be 5 years out of date.
Those have always been the challenges. I mean, if you think about, we used to argue over what goes on the front page of the report because parents only read the front page. So then we had the argument, well, the front page is for the parents, the rest of the report is for the professionals. Then people wouldn't accept that. So the rest of the report was written as if it was for imbecilic parents, particularly, shall we say. And now we've got the coloured dots, which have replaced the front page summary. And that's always what's going to happen. So you have to get rid of the coloured dots and replace it with a block of text and go back if you're going to solve that problem. The whole nature of reporting is that people are superficial in how they look at them.
Yeah. Which
Or
actually,
you get rid of grades altogether.
That's what I would like.
If you could get to a point
for safeguarding, which is potentially, arguably, the most important, you know, met or not met, and then you read the words. That's okay. And I think schools, yes, if there are schools that are unsafe, that are inappropriate places for children to be, then that has to be called out. Absolutely. You know, as a parent and a grandparent, that is what I want. But other than that, we are met or not met, and now read what that school offers your child. And then you can make a decision. If you're choosing a school, is that the school for you? But just saying one word or just a series of dots that actually don't relate to anything, when you look at them, they're just dots. They're not dots with a word against them to describe what the dot is for. So it's clear from that it doesn't matter what you got the dots in. You just got a series of coloured dots. You then have to work your way through the report to see what the dots are actually about. And I think that's been a ridiculous situation to put us in. It's unhelpful, and as Julie has just said, actually tells parents something about the school which is potentially quite untrue.
Yeah, I want to try and bring it to a close, if I may. It might be worthwhile just sort of doing a little bit of crystal ball gazing. Is that what we do? And just think about where this all might lead. Whether you think there is sufficient emphasis within government to want to make change, or whether they're just going to, you know, bolt everything down and just stay as we are. I mean, I want to try and be a bit positive here if we can get to that point. Julie, have you got a thought as to where we might end up?
I think it's going to have to run a bit longer before I think there's sufficient appetite for change with the department and Ofsted. But I think it absolutely has to happen. I think that Secure Fit has been a killer. I really do. And I would really like those inspectors to have that bit of the training about what happens if somebody says, no, they're not okay, and they don't want another cup of tea. And, I think it's a bit of going a bit too far saying, oh, well, we'll just pause the inspection then. Why is that? If people should feel that they are, at liberty to say, no, actually, I'm not happy with the way this is going, and people need to take that seriously. But I do think a lot of it is around this secure fit, best fit thing, and I really think as a starter, that's got to change.
Adrian Lyons.
Adrian Lyons, right. I think that John has, in his recounting of what's happened, he's touched on a lot of things that reflect the reality of Ofsted being a bureaucracy, and things disappear into it. There's because it's all about delivering vast volumes of inspections around the country, there isn't really an opportunity for human interaction. That's true of the inspection itself, whereas you said, John, there's far too much to cover. It's also true of when things then go into the complaints, phoning Ofsted for help or advice during an inspection. It all goes into this bureaucracy, at the top of which is the chief inspector, which is why him saying, or him suggesting it's not his personal choice to merge these grades. It's just off the wall ludicrous. He is the only person in Ofsted who has any decision-making powers. Everybody else works and operates on his behalf. Sorry, that wasn't a particularly positive look ahead, was it, Frank? I think, and the reason I'm not being particularly positive, to be honest, is because there was quite a head of steam for changing, reforming Ofsted when the new government came in, but that just got lost, and somehow we, as a profession, but as individuals, as local head teachers, need to really lobby your MPs, because it's only going to be political will that's going to get any change here.
I agree with that. Adrian Gray.
Are you going to challenge me to be more positive, Frank?
Well, and don't break your habit of a lifetime. I'm not.
I mean, I think the point about government vision is important. I do think that we've done this system for enough years now that it is time to think about where we do it differently from the beginning. The whole process of, if you think about where did it come from, it all came from the idea that we could improve schools by increasing competition, and therefore parents needed the reports to make the decision. We've done that now, so we need to go back to the beginning and say, why are we reporting? Why are we doing this? Because it's not to engender competition between schools in the sort of neoliberal model anymore. So to go back to why are we doing it, then we can think better about, well, how do we do it best in order to achieve the reasons that we're doing it for? So that would be, because the landscape now is completely different to where it was in the 1990s. And so we need to think from fresh, rather than tinkering a bit at a time within basically the same delivery model. And the problem with the delivery model is we haven't got enough money to deliver proper inspections.
Correct.
It's almost like incremental change is not enough, isn't it?
No.
Well, that's right. We've done that. We need to start again now.
John, do you want to have you got any thoughts for the future, apart from retirement?
I think that what you guys are doing, trying to publicise this, with the credibility that you have of between you decades of experience actually working for this organisation, I think is really important. And I do hope that with Christine Gilbert as chair, and I'm hoping, I'm always optimistic, that pressure can come to bear to actually make Ofsted. It has a huge potential to be an amazing force for good in our schools. With the level of expertise of inspectors coming into those schools, with all the knowledge that they have, if this was something where it was all about school improvement, if it wasn't high stakes, career-breaking risk that we face with Ofsted arriving each time, if it was collaborative, if it was all about school improvement, if it was focused on outcomes for children and giving proper feedback to parents, it could be amazing. I hope that somehow that can be realised. But as we say, unless there is political will to do that, I really fear for this, because I don't know how much worse it's going to get before somebody recognises that it's just intolerable now.
Yeah, and if I can just bring it to a close, I'm very grateful for all your honest comments, and John, your openness as well, reaching out. It's been very helpful. There's a lot going on politically at the moment. There's quite a lot. I think a number of people would suggest that there's quite a lot of low-hanging fruit that has not been picked and amended. And, this may well be the time for reconsidering, the journey that's been travelled by this government, and also what it intends to do to move forward in a slightly different way. So I'm not making a political statement there. I'm just saying there's change afoot, or there's even the Prime Minister is saying, we need more radical change. So, perhaps Ofsted inspections is one where some time could be spent making sure it's a better experience for everybody, because it's a hard job for inspectors as well as for head teachers. So thanks, colleagues. Well, should we put another date in the diary 6 months from now? Perhaps it might be worthwhile. We'll do that. But anyway, thank you everybody for watching and listening, and for the time. And thank you once again, John, for your contribution. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yes.